Everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, my guest is Cornelius Brown. Cornelius, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure to have you here on the show with us today.
It's an honor to be here.
And today, we're going to sit back and we're going to relax and we're going to give you a little bit of history today, because today we are speaking about the African Indians. So Cornelius is here with us, and Cornelius has a lot of information about the African Indians. So Cornelius, you know, this is the show where we sit back and we make daily conversation with real people like yourself about real subjects in life. So tell us about the African Indian. Cornelius, what about the African Indian that you want to share with us today?
Well, the history of the African Indian goes all the way back to the indigenous people of the land, from Canada all the way down to Peru. It starts with the great Olmec Empire. And these heads, the scientists have predated them to 300 million years. They were called the great mound builders, or the ancient ones, the Washita Moors, as we say in America. On the walls in the Olmec Empire, they have glyphs that show Africans, men of African descent, along with red men, and these Olmecs were the teachers and the scholars. They were the ones that generated this great Mayan calendar. They were the fathers of the Mayans and the Olmecs, and the fathers of the Mayans and the Aztecs. And it just so happened they brought this knowledge from places we don't even understand. For example, they have what they call the Eagle King, who was a descendant from the Mayan and the Aztecs. There are a couple different images that we have and we'll share with you. The other images that we want to go back to that connect to it are the images of Egypt and the walls there that show, of course, men of African descent, because Africa and Egypt is in Africa.
So you mean that Egypt is a part of Africa?
Yes, it's a part of that continent, and it just so happens that historically our continent was one big huge continent called Pangaea, and the Atlantic Ocean was the Atlantis River that ran down the middle. And so this great myth about Atlantis, or Mu, has relevance. A great earthquake came. Before that, Ham, son of Noah, settled on one side of the river, and Cush, his son, settled on the other. A great earthquake came, and the Atlantic River became an ocean. That's why you can take the continents and you can piece them back together like a puzzle. That's why you have pyramids here and pyramids over there.
Okay, but you spoke about this great wall over in Egypt. Tell us why this wall is so important.
Well, there's a wall there that runs through China. That wall is connected to the Moors who conquered all of Spain. The architecture is there. The history proves that when they conquered Spain, they conquered all of northern Africa, all through Morocco, and on into China. And the architecture is exactly the same, and the artifacts prove that these men were Africans or African Indians, indigenous people to the land.
Okay, and why is that so important to us today?
The reason why that's so powerfully important is that this at one time was Africa also. And we, as people of African descent, are connected to this land from histories gone by, millions of years. So the reality is we didn't come here on boats. There were those Europeans who gathered up more Africans to bring them here on boats to pick that cotton, but in reality, we have origins so far back, they don't even know exactly how far back.
So would it be fair to say that Africans was already in this country that we call America?
Already here and throughout the world. Back in this Atlantis, all cultures and all races all originated from the black. And we know that from the scientists. Dr. Lawrence Leakey found those artifacts over in Ethiopia around Olduvai Gorge and Lake Victoria that show that this African woman was the first. And when they did this human genome testing and they tested the human genome, they found that the Ethiopian woman had the genetic code for all of humanity. No one else has that as a genetic marker or genetic trace. So it's a beautiful heritage we have here as Africans, and that heritage connects us all as one big family.
Okay. Now, what makes the African Indians so special?
What makes them special is that from the artifacts, they predate Egypt even. It predates even Africa. The ones here who call ourselves Africans, colored Negroes, we were called Moors from ancient times. We were subjects of the Moroccan Empire, or the Sultan of Morocco actually was the king over everything from the Great Northwest Territory to Peru. That's heavy stuff, and it may hurt some people's feelings, but reality and truth, the artifacts don't lie. And therein you have it, the real history of the world that's been hidden from us. They call it that great Masonic secret, but it's time for that secret to be revealed, because the word Moor means Lord of the earth. There was a time when this African Indian ruled the world. And when Muhammad ibn Abdullah conquered all of Spain, okay, he brought the Renaissance to Europe. In his hand, his wisdom and knowledge, the knowledge of those people were the descendants from the great priesthood of Egypt. People don't tell us that the world was black. They tell us all these untruths, and when you build a nation on lies, you get garbage back in return. Therein lies the problem with this country. These men that came here from Israel with the full headdress on were prophets, spoke ancient Hebrew, and now we're being afflicted. And we wonder why we get 110 tornadoes in one storm. Someone is not pleased with the things that are going on here, and it's reflected. Every time one of us is afflicted, someone upstairs comes down and deals justice, and people are not paying attention, unfortunately. So we go back to Egypt. Just so happens that every, and I'll use this word loosely, religion on the planet came out of Egypt, and that was Africa. It's appalling that we don't go back to the reality, because Charlemagne and what's the other fella's name? Constantine, they went to Egypt, tried to knock the noses off the pharaohs because they see these are Negroes here. And what they did is they took to the walls and they said, okay, now they got this Ankh thing. We'll make that a cross and we'll take it and teach it as a religion. Or this here, we find that they have this Osiris and a Set, and that's that Mother Mary with the Christ child, black woman. We're going to take her and paint her white, and we're going to take that and sell it to the world with a white Jesus. How dare you play with God? If there is such a God, and I know there is, to play with truth like that, it's appalling. But you know, there are people out there who like to do their thing, and that's all right too, but it has a repercussion, so to speak. So we go from Egypt and those things that are relevant to Africa, and we look at a man by the name of Shaka Zulu. They say that that man was so fierce that most men couldn't look him in his eye. He was so fierce, they would stare away or they would look away from him. That's our heritage, our true reality of who we are. Why is that so important? It just so happens that you got mad scientists out there who made this Hadron Collider, this thing they call in CERN, that splits the atom down to its foundations. They were trying to get away from this creator and ran right into him with this God particle of theirs. And it just so happens that particle that's in everything, and it's in the air, we can't see it, it's just like melanin. So because you were created first, you are a direct descendant from that most powerful creator. That Yeshua guy was the same, and he had a special will and a special purpose, because they said he was the Son of God. What does that mean? He has these erased years of his life from when he was a boy to when he became a 30-year-old man and was baptized, somewheres abouts. Those years he spent in Egypt. What happened? When Herod came in to destroy and kill all the young boys, Mary and Joseph took him to Egypt. If the prophets were in trouble, they were inflicted by their people. They're telling the truth, but somebody don't like it. They went into Egypt for safety, because you wouldn't dare come down there. No European would come down into Egypt with anything. Talk about a war, because we had 100 million troops. There wasn't no time to play games, so that was a safety net for us. And I get emotional and I get about it, but it's the reality, man. You know, because we got so many of us young brothers around here inflicting each other, blowing out each other's brains. Now, you were prophets of God, and here you are. So if the prophets of the world are going hog wild, what happens to the world? Mm-hmm. That story about Adam, and he said, "Cursed is the ground on which you stand, and thorns and thistles will go through." That's talking about that other dude, man. That's why he has to come up with GMOs, because he can't touch a plant and make it live. Mm-hmm. He relied on us to pick the cotton because the plant would die if he touched it. Whoa, that's heavy stuff now. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, it is. We're going to go into a short commercial break, and when I come back, we'll continue our conversation with Cornelius Brown. We'll be right back. This is Cornelius Brown. And just before we went into the commercial break, we were sitting back here and we was talking about the African Indian. There's so much historical information that a lot of people don't know about or are not aware of. So today we invited Cornelius Brown here on the show with us. Cornelius, continue your conversation about the African Indian.
Well, the conversation, it continues in a beautiful way because we have to go back to Shaka Zulu and the African kings. And we look at images of them, and you find that they had feathers that they wore and certain headdresses. That thing goes all the way back to this Yeshua guy. He was a real man, but we're going to stick to the history of it all. So the headdresses and the culture of the world, the races of the world. We know that the African woman can produce an albino child. What the Egyptians did was they took our albinos and bred them together to make a nation of people. Mm-hmm. At one time, Egypt, the Sahara, and the Mojave were tropical jungles. They proved that from the watermarks on the Sphinx. It just so happens when it became a desert, albinos had to migrate out of that hot area and migrate to the Caucasus Mountains. That's where the Caucasian came from. But the problem was that he was separated from culture, separated from knowledge, separated from his families, and when he came back out of those mountains and those caves, he was angry at the world. That's why you look at our history here as slaves and you see that the slave master wanted to get Big Mama and bring her in to raise his children. She would even suckle them because they were home again. They felt home and made them whole. So we look at her, the African woman, and see that when they did your human genome, as I said, they found that she had the genes for everyone on the planet. And we have images of her. We go from there to a book by a man by the name of David Imhotep. And on the cover of that book, it says Black Indians. And the Indians were originally African. They were from Africa in the book, and you'll show the images of that. We go from there to look at these Indian chiefs with the headdress. That's all African stuff, man, Shaka Zulu. The headdress was there, and we go all the way back to Israel. The artifacts prove from this video that there was a migration 50,000 years ago from there over to the Middle East and the Fertile Crescent to here. Then there was a migration 10,000 years ago, a migration during the times of Christ. So where does all that fit into the scheme of things? Well, 10,000 years ago, the Assyrian king Sennacherib, he conquered the northern 10-tribe kingdom of Samaria. That's where the samurai came from. The swinger of the sword was all cultures and all beginnings, all religions sprang from Africa, from Egypt. The Buddha, the Shinto, all of it. Everything. The Christianity even. There are monasteries in Ethiopia, Lalibela, date back 110,000 years. What made us so unique as Moors? Because we allowed Christians and Muslims to live side by side, because it just so happens that this Muslim thing predates Christianity. It was part of our ancient culture, part of how we lived. We didn't talk it or preach it, we lived it. They took care of the land, remember? There was a great chief, Geronimo, said, one day you'll have to buy your water. What are we doing today? That's a prophet if ever heard one speak now. So when they were conquered, that 10-tribe northern kingdom in Israel, They could get on the Cape Horn of Africa and catch the Northwest Passage. Didn't even have to have a sail. The boat would shoot right over to the middle of this continent, right over to Trinidad and the Brazil and the Colombians. It would carry itself. They could sit and they could eat and do their thing, and that boat would keep on moving, man. That's how Columbus got here by mistake. He was heading to India, landed here, and looked up and said, Indians. But we were Moors. We had the tents. Think about the narrative in that thing they call the Bible that's been tampered with. They lived in tents. They roamed in the wilderness. They had a tent of meeting. They had blood and sacrifices and smoke. If that's not Indians, man, somebody prove me wrong.
Quite interesting.
So they came here then, and then what happened that was so magnificent? Because there was a leader among them, a kind and gentle man that was put up on a stake and tortured. But he lived. They took him down. And there was a wealthy man that took him in and took care of him, but he was broken. He had to go before the Flavian Caesars and give over his birthright and his throne. That was the agreement, to live. And they banished him off to Europe. That's where this King Arthur story comes from. If you've ever watched it, they talk about King Arthur and that sword of rulership. He was talking about the black man, this Yeshua, king of Manu, that lived in heaven, a place called heaven over there, and his mother's name was Mary. So when he fell, they said the land without a king, it wouldn't even grow. The plants, everything, and they mourned. If you look at Excalibur, the movie, they tell us about it, but we're not paying attention. So what happens? They came here, then the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, when the Flavian Caesars twisted our book called the Bible, gave us a New Testament from a Moor named Josephus, Flavius Josephus, who was a Roman, and he was an Israelite, and he was called Paul, Saul, the apostle. This dude helped him spin our books from ancient times to conquer us by directing us away from our God so that they could break our connection to him, and boom, they came in and leveled off all of Jerusalem. Judah and Benjamin got on boats and they came on home. They came here to the ancient ones for protection. Speaking ancient Hebrew, man, living in them tents with headdresses, 200 nations of chiefs would come together and they would settle their differences. Wrote a constitution for those 13 colonies to live here in peace, and they overthrew our government. That's why you got a pyramid on the back of the dollar today. 50,000 years it dates back, and a Moorish flag, fuchsia flag with a green star. The reality of it all. Because during George's time, they had to write treaties with the Sultan of Morocco just to do what they did, man, just to come here. Because that skull and crossbone thing, that was the Sultan's military, his navy, and they had the whole world locked down. You had to pay him to go from point A to point B anywhere in the world. But a 7-year drought came. And it came into the diaspora of Africa. It came into Europe. The only place you could get food was here in the Americas and over in the Fertile Crescent. So he had started unfolding. Everything started unfolding. His navy, men started to banish. They started to break ranks. He started signing treaties, man. And it just so happened that George Washington was appointed to be a general by John Hanson, who was a black president. 7 black presidents before George. And they've been hiding all this. These secret societies and these fraternities and sororities learn all this stuff. And these preachers, but they are sworn by oath to death to tell it.
We'll go to another short break, and when I return, we'll continue our conversation with Cornelius Brown. Ladies and gentlemen, Cornelius Brown is on the Letammarr Show today. We'll be right back. My guest is Cornelius Brown, and we are sitting here and we are having a discussion about the African Indian. So, Cornelius, let's continue this great conversation about the African Indian.
Man, we pick right up again in a perfect place. Got a girl by the name of Diane Fletcher that was a member of this Indian nation. And if you look at her, you say, man, that's a sister with long, beautiful braids. You'll show them that image of her. Then you got the black Indians of Paraguay. We got images of them. Negroes, they so call them, dressed up with feathers and so on. Black Indian chiefs spoke ancient Hebrew. Prophets of God was slaughtered by the Europeans. Can you imagine the God's anger with that? Just like Jezebel and Ahaz did way back in the day, a prophet had to come up and deal with that situation. Now we're dealing with it today. It's all coming back, man, just like the good old book said. We get to back over in Europe, because we got to get back there, man, to get this thing all sorted out. We get to a man by the name of Muhammad ibn Abdullah, great prophet, great Moor, great king, came in and conquered all of Spain, brought in the Renaissance, built cities with paved streets, indoor plumbing, and lighted cities, man. Brought the Renaissance to Europe, and he was called there for a purpose. Because that fella King James and those ancient Israelites who moved there and built all those monasteries and cathedrals of Christian origin, built by Moors. They don't tell us that either, that all of Europe was black, and they were nobles, and there was a little French man going through the town, going through the country, taking notes and writing down descriptions, because of what they were doing were killing the nobles and putting the white man in their place. This is what went down over there in Europe. And it got so bad, they had to make a call out to their brothers. The great Saracen Moors came in and destroyed. But what they did was of a kind of gentle rule, because they took the women and children as spoil of war, and they kept coming. They kept coming. And then Ferdinand and Isabella and those European nobles would burn the land behind them, burn the crops, burn the cities, but they kept coming. So they said, Charles the Frank, his name was, he said, man, we got to do something about these guys. We can't stop them. So I got a plan. Stop burning the cities, leave behind some gold, and leave behind some white women. And before you know it, we were at each other's throats. And they kicked us out of Spain. We were there for 700 years. How to read, taught them how to be a philosopher. The great Imhotep, the great Josephus, the great Joseph, from the tribe of Israel, Hermes Trismegistus. These were all the same man. Thoth, the first physician, man, the first philosopher. The Greeks came into Egypt to learn. They don't tell us that, because Egypt is in Africa.
Yeah, but they say that the Greeks was the first educated people.
That's a lie, because the Greeks was black as coal, the first Greeks, and they just sprang out of Africa. They were the first nation, the first country to be wiped out all the indigenous people. When that beast came out of them caves, who has that Neanderthal gene? We don't even have that crap. Brought in all kinds of things like Alzheimer's and ADHD, and all that crap came into the human genome from that caveman.
But isn't it fair to say, back in those days that, in the medieval days, when we speak about, mental illness, Alzheimer's, dementia and stuff, all they have is a form of some type of mental illness. But wouldn't it be fair to say that a lot of that derived, back in the medieval days, before we had labels like Alzheimer's, dementia, before we called them those things, though, but most of those things was considered as a curse?
Yes, they were. And there were cultures that considered albinism a curse also. That's what the whole story about Cain and Abel was about. The true God said, I'll put a mark on you, Cain, because of what you did. I'm not going to let anybody kill you, but I'm going to banish you. But I don't want them to hurt you. So they're going to look at you and say, oh, he's got the mark.
Well, so the biblical story about Cain and Abel, I take it that's who you are speaking about.
Right.
So the biblical story is that, that as part of his punishment, that Cain would have to roam the earth for the rest of his life.
Right. Absolutely. And it just so happens that he became a nation. And that nation has picked up those genetic markers that create all this ADHD and all this stuff that afflicts the humankind, because our Egyptians were so wise that they were the Darwinians. They bred peoples together to make a people. Actually, they were making a slave.
But let's get back to this for a second, though, because you talk about ADHD, you talk about people who have Alzheimer's. You said it was like some type of derivative, from back in those days that that was created by, I guess, the cavemen.
Right.
It's what you basically is saying, though. But a lot of that said that was genetically.
Yes, there are genetic markers for all of that. And it just so happened those genetic markers were introduced by that Neanderthal. Most of that was. And here's how it works. As a species of people, when we are left in peace and left in control of our destinies and left in a harmonic balance, those things stay hidden in our genes. But stress causes those things to express themselves. They're like hidden little doors that are opened by stress. Boom, and all of a sudden that door opens, you got a full-blown manic. You got psychosis. And then you got these drugs, these that come from heroin. What do we call those morphines and so on. And all of them, opioids, and all of them have a structure similar to melanin. That's why we are so apt to fall to these things, because they are similar to the structure of our making. They are similar to the dark matter. And it creates a real problem. And there are so many people out there that know that, and they play on it. They pump the drugs into our cities because we don't have no airplanes and boats to be shooting that stuff in here. Somebody from way up there is doing that, and they know.
So what would be the purpose of all of this?
The purpose of all of this is to hide the reality of who that black man is. That's what it's really all about, man. Because the reality is we go right back to Muhammad ibn Abdullah and all the knowledge and wisdom of the world coming out of Egypt and out of Africa, which is Egypt. It so happens that the Egyptians, their deities were women. You ask, why would that be? I thought man ruled the world. That was not the case, because they knew that the spirit never dies. The shell dies, but that spirit goes back to the great creator, and he can take that spirit and shoot it back down through a womb again, man. That's where the cross came from, the Ankh. That circle represented the womb, those two branches, the fallopian tube, and that birth canal, man. So that black woman was put on high because she was the builder of civilizations. She was the great God, man, because Osiris could come back. All they had to do was treat her right, man, and he'd come back walking and talking. Why was that so unique? That goes back to Buddhism. Goes back to that Yeshua guy and Hare Krishna and Buddha and all of them. Because of their melanin, they could awaken their pineal gland through meditation. That would awaken all the cells in their brain, man, and you got someone with no projection. This is the truth that they've been hiding from us, that you are the God. In Luke it says, he said, you are all gods. That's what he said, and that's what he meant. Through meditation, we would bring ourselves back to glory. Because we were the rulers at one time, and we, because of the Olmec situation, are the Alpha and the Omega. We have no beginning and we shall have no end. There's a man walking around out there with an expiration date, and he knows it. There's some science behind that too, man. It has to do with the Mayan calendar. Because what they found is that our planets, they rotate around the sun, and the sun goes around the Milky Way. The Milky Way galaxy goes around the other galaxies, which are part of the center of the universe, and we're being pulled. The sun, because it has its great dynamic gravity, it pulls the planets over thousands of years closer and closer and closer. I won't even get into the theory of that in the Dr. Delbert Blair, but you can see him on YouTube and he'll tell you all about it. How they found pyramids on Mars and Egyptian type stuff. And Mars is too hot now. So we had to jump from Mars to the next planet back, which was Earth. That's where the Olmecs came from. That is a real serious situation. Now the Earth is being pulled. It said we would go from the age of Pisces, the Piscean rule of the Roman, to the age of Aquarius, when that black man would come back to glory. And there ain't nothing anybody can do about it, because the planet's getting hotter. It don't have nothing to do with pollution. It is what it is. Like he told Moses when he asked him, what is your name and who should we call you? He said, I am that I am. It is what it is. Aya, Esha, Aya. And it just so happens those Indian chiefs, what were they marching and talking? Aya, Aya, Aya. They were invoking the Great Spirit, man. They go from covering the land to a minority. How many of you think had to die? Millions and millions and millions. But our ancestors knew that we would be subjected to this ruler to refine us, to bring us to who we were supposed to be. Because when we all come together in peace and quit being divided by his tricks, then we can stop letting our children starve to death in Africa and in the United States.
Why is that?
Because they've taken the time. What happened to us is that they did a 3-card Molly, man, back in right in the War of Independence or before George's time. The Europeans took the rulers and nobility from here, shipped them to Africa. They took the African nobles and shipped them to Europe, took the Europeans and shipped them to America. Threw our whole leadership off, and then they conquered us, took it into slavery, wouldn't let us read, wouldn't let you have an ancient book until they twisted and turned it, gave you that white Jesus, render Caesar things to Caesar. Whatever black man would say that.
You speak about white Jesus, though, and I've been hearing a lot of talk about white Jesus these days, though. And why is it that, in your opinion, from your own introspection, why is it there's so much focus on white Jesus?
The focus came from that Piscean age. He was the serpent, or that dragon, that Roman, because there was a black Holy Roman Empire, and then there was a great Roman Empire that had those Caucasian Caesars who were blended in with that caveman. They were giants, man. Some of these dudes like Charlemagne was 9 feet tall. And so what happened is, why that white Jesus is so relevant is because they had to change our view of ourselves to conquer us. Because the true Yeshua from the Old Testament and from the book of Isaiah, from the books in the old Dead Sea Scrolls, he was about getting Rome out of there. We kept bringing up messiahs. There wasn't just one Yeshua. There were many, and then there were Eleazar. They kept bringing up the priests, and they're bringing them up to put Rome out of there because they knew they had to deal with a problem. That problem started in Egypt. We talked about that. They made a nation of people, and in their ancient writings they said it is the worst mistake they ever made.
And why do you think so many people of color to white Jesus? Why is this?
Well, because the trick is this, man. They know our nature. They know our spirit. They know we have this desire to serve that Creator. And they know that we, in our genes, know of a Yeshua. Now, here's how it works. They got this stuff they call dormant or junk DNA. It just so happens scientists are finding our history is written in it. So when our babies are born, you look down at them, they're looking up at the world and say, man, that baby's born with his eyes wide open. He must have been here before. You're darn right he's been here before. The spirits keep coming back, and our ancient ones knew that. So in order to conquer a God, you got to give him a new one. You got to give him a God, don't look like him, don't act like him, don't smell like him. And you make him worship that, man, and you got him because you got him off his square. You got him off his black God by giving him a white Jesus. They give you this son of God as white. Well, that dude, man, his pineal gland is calcified. But the scholars say that the black man's heart chakra is calcified, which is worse. We need to get back to the heart of things because we knew, the great Saracen Moors and the great Egyptians knew that you had to go to the bottom and bring that man back up. Because if you didn't, the big thunder boom was going to come down and kick the whole damn nation apart. He was going to rule and conquer nations because of it. So we got off our square by mistreating. What does the narrative say? It says, if you mistreat the widows and orphans, he said, I was going to come in and destroy. That's what we were doing. It's our own fault because we got off what we were supposed to do. And then there was a king that came in with schizophrenia, must have been, because he woke up one day and decided, we're going to kill all these Christians. We're going to burn down their churches. When the word got back to the Moors in Europe, what do you think happened? A great war broke out. Moors against Christians, Muslim against Christian, went on for 1,000 years. Black man against black man for what he believed. And it all came from one. Came out of Egypt, but he got it twisted. So what happened? They said, we got to settle this thing, man. We need to go to the promised land. They come over here, and it was the great experiment. Muslims side by side with Christians. You go into Europe, King Boris I, a king of Bulgaria, black man. Adolf Ludwig, black man, one of the nobles of Europe. Then you get down to our time, man, right during this slavery thing, when now they're trying to free the gods. People like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. History right here in this Battle Creek. because there was a battle on the creek when the red Indians called in the black Indians. We got together and kicked some butt and kicked them Europeans back into place. That history's right here. We should have a historical society right here with our own historical museum that shows it all, man, because it all ended up right here on this battle in this creek, man. And Sojourner Truth was bringing them right here to freedom, bringing the gods and bringing them here to freedom. You got all the way down here. Let's see what we got next. Marcus Garvey, man. And Noble Drew Ali. These brothers knew this stuff long before I was born about the true history of the black man and how there was a need for him to separate himself because he was getting afflicted to the point where our preamble talks about it. If you have a nation within a nation and a people that are being afflicted by their government, they have the right to separate themselves from it, form their own nation, own this land. Our forefathers knew there was going to come a day when we'd have to separate ourselves, because you look at what's going on in these cities, man. You got the suburbs, they got $300,000 homes and up, these Caucasians do, and we're living in Flint. And we're living in Battle Creek and squalor on land that belongs to us.
But you're talking about things that are here in Michigan. Make a little correction on that. It's just not that Caucasians, Anglo-Saxons, that live in beautiful homes, but there's also black people that live in these beautiful homes as well, and also some Indians live in these beautiful homes as well. So I just don't want to make the focus just on, on white people, because this is not the type of show to discuss or try to disclaim something or take something away from any group of people, though. So you can continue with your conversation.
You do have a good point, and I do want to clarify that, because it goes back to knowledge and spirituality and culture, because we are all one big dysfunctional family. Because our Caucasians came from our albinos. That's the reality of it. A little child who wanted to find his way home. It just so happened back in Egypt that we taught them in Egypt and Europe.
Here's important. To set the conversation for a second, because you speak about dysfunctional. And I know that, I had several guests on the show in the past, and we talked about dysfunctional people. And Ted Nicholson, who wrote the book for integrity, character and integrity among today's youth and stuff. And we talked about dysfunctional families and dysfunctional people. But you says that we are one big culture of people that is dysfunctional.
Yes.
And I like to exclude myself from that.
He can exclude it. It's cool, man. It's okay. Let me clarify. Let me clarify.
My father taught me well. And my parents were dysfunctional.
Let me clarify that. I wasn't talking about parents, but I was talking about as a world civilization.
Okay.
You see, because we got people inflicting other people, and it ain't just a race thing, man. It's well beyond that, because we got poor whites being afflicted by the same people.
Dysfunctional starts with the individual.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, though.
Absolutely.
Even if you come from a family that everyone in the household is functional people.
Sure.
And stuff. Dysfunctional can occur at any given moment, at any given time. And it doesn't have to be a certain group of people.
And what I'm talking about is dysfunctional societies, because that's what creates a Flint. Okay. That's what creates the north side of Battle Creek. That's what creates an inner city Chicago
problem. If you say dysfunctional society, is it that society is not being functional enough? Or as society, we are functional people? So
we are functional people, but in a dysfunctional society. And here's why. Here's my theory on it. What happened back in Europe and back in Egypt is they developed a science of society and a science of governance and rulership. And it had to do with high science, like this Illuminati thing they talk about, or this New World Order. That was a concept from way back in the Moors, man. The Moors started that concept of a one world government for peace, not for inflicting people with it. So what you got is all that knowledge was transferred to a certain group of people, and they are not all Caucasians, man. And they rule, they have the power of government now, and they have the billions of dollars behind them. And they're using that science of population control, whatever you want to call it, to inflict everybody. So they're using your tools to hurt you. and to hurt their own kind, to hurt the world, because that stuff needs to go back into the hands of the people who were responsible with it and how they used it. They got down at the bottom and they brought the dudes at the bottom up. It didn't matter what race they were, because they knew that if they didn't, there was going to be an answer from upstairs. And that answer no man could reckon with, see? So there it is, man, the history of the world. And then you get back to one of the most powerful images in all of the ones that you'll show. At the end, you see two Ethiopian men riding lions like ponies. What kind of man can do that? Sounds like a Lord of the Earth, because we thought that the King of the Beast was a lion, found out it was a man with brown skin. Therein lies the reality of it all, man. That picture's worth 1,000 words. There you have it. So,
And with that, I'm going to go into another break, and we'll be right back with Cornelius Brown. He's on the Letammarr Show today. We'll be right back. Back. Today my guest is Cornelius Brown, and just before we went into the commercial break, we was having some interesting conversation about the African Indian. So Cornelius is going to continue his conversation talking about the African Indian. Let's continue the conversation.
all right, well, where we continue at is we have an image of the Great Seal of the Republic, as we talked about earlier, with that great pyramid with the eye at the top. And then we have the seal of the bird. Why is all this so important? Well, this gets back to the essence of how this nation was founded. Because as the story goes, when Christopher Columbus came here by mistake, what they were doing when they brought war to this nation that was here was they were chopping the heads off our women, and they were taking our babies by the ankles and bashing their heads on trees and throwing them to their dogs. They had how they were dealing with us. The deal is that we got an image of black Indians of southern Mexico. You'll show that image. And then we have the image of the god, the African woman, the dark African woman, who was the god, the mother of civilization, man. And now look how she's being afflicted. We have to bring our woman back to her godship so we can bring our civilization back to the reality of heaven, man. That's real. We took her and put her down. There's a God, buddy, and I think he's not happy with this thing, and he's getting ready to set it right quick. But it comes from knowledge. We have to wake up to who we were, to know who we are, to know who we shall become. Because according to the model in Canada, you're going back to your godhood, man. You better get ready, because you're going to get drug along or you're going to get left behind. That's your choice.
You know, Cornelius, it has really been a pleasure, speaking with you and having you here today on this show. I really got a good insight, of some of the knowledge that you've been sharing with us today. And before we leave the show, I would like to say, or ask you, is there any words of wisdom, of knowledge that you would like to share with our TV audience or someone who's watching this broadcast that can benefit from some of the things that you spoke about today about the African Indian?
Well, the reality is, in my lifetime, I've had 2 brothers get murdered in this town. Watched it kill my mother. I work at the very cemetery where she's buried. Died in my arms. Waited all day till into the night for me to get there. I performed CPR on her and she went to sleep. What does that have to do with our world in this country? I graduated with young African American men that couldn't even read in 78, 77, 78, and 79, right from Battle Creek Central. So my words of wisdom are from the words of Noble Drew Ali. Study, 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 and study some more. And after you've studied, then you study yourself to know who you are and who you were, who you are and who you shall become. And then we will set matters straight in the affairs of men. Take your place among the affairs of men. You are the ruler and the leader, the father of civilizations. Get back to where you were. Get back on your square.
Okay, and with those words, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in today to the Letammarr Show. And we always end this show with the sign of peace. So take care, and I will see you on the next Letammarr Show. Take care.